not just about like who is in. It's like who stays out of this neighborhood because we have invented a language amongst ourselves that is ours, and that's affection. That's intimacy.
Protection.
It's protection. The handshakes that you make up with your friends, these are intimacy moments, and the Fab Five is a moment of intimacy. And to see how particularly white sportscasters talked about the Fab Five, I remember being like, these people must, not as a 9-year-old, I didn't think about this, but now I look back and I think these people must have been my enemy.
How you guys doing today? Good. Good energy in the crowd today. This is going to be an exciting event. I do want to welcome you all to Mahogany Books, our author talk featuring Hanif Abdurraqib, as well as a conversationist, Jason Reynolds. A little bit about who we are. Who's here familiar with Mahogany Books? Love it. Thank you. Wasn't expecting that, but I appreciate it. So Mahogany Books is owned by my wife and I. We founded it in 2007. The lady back there, give her a hand. It was founded in 2007 as a online bookstore first. I am from here. I'm from Southeast DC. Grew up in the area, so I'm very familiar with the impact of bookstores in our community. The thing, though, was not everyone has access to these type of books. My wife, who is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, didn't have access to, I said, okay, Oklahoma had in the crowd. She didn't have access to these type of bookstores. So what we wanted to do was in 2007, create an online website that made these types of books accessible to everyone across the country. Wherever you were, everyone should have access to these books. The other thing that was really important for us was nights like this, to make writers of this caliber accessible to the community wherever you are. So DC is fantastic. I'm from DC, but we should have author events here in PG County as well. So being able to partner with incredible partners like Doxson Hill Library that I used as a kid when I was down in Forest Heights. I was, I think, doing a report. Maybe that's all I was supposed to be doing, was a report. But it's incredible to be able to partner with these type of organizations to make sure you guys have access to incredible writers like Hanif and Jason. So I just want to thank you guys for coming out to attend this event. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fantastic. Just please enjoy yourself. We are recording for our podcast, so just, if you're supposed to be at work, maybe not, yell your name out or whatever. But we're going to have a good time. So what I want to do is first bring out our conversation host, Jason Reynolds, and I have, there you go ahead. I have a little bit about him here. Jason Reynolds is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of many award-winning books, including Look Both Ways, A Tale Told in 10 Blocks, and Stunt Boy in the Meantime. He's the recipient of the Newbery Honor, a Prince Honor, an NAACP Image Award, and multiple Coretta Scott King Honors. Please welcome out Jason Reynolds. All right. And the man of the hour, the person we're here to see, whose book just hit the shelves this week. Everyone is loving it. Hanif Abdurraqib. Hanif is a poet, essayist, and a cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio, and the recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. His most recent book, A Little Devil in America, was the winner of the Carnegie Medal and the Gordon Burns Prize, and a finalist for the National Book Award. Please welcome Hanif.
Hey, everybody.
What's happening, everybody? Y'all good? Can y'all hear me? Y'all like this from under? Oh, thank you very much. So before we get started, let me just say, first of all, welcome, Hanif. Welcome to Oxon Hill. It's different this time because this is where I'm from. This is like
right.
my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So welcome to Oxon Hill.
Yeah.
Welcome to the library. For all of you, thank you for coming. I want to say really quickly before we get into everything and before you make your remarks, I like to make sure that people know that when we do these events, though they're here to celebrate the author, though they're here for some discourse and some engagement, we also really need y'all to buy the book. And I just don't have no shame when it comes to this. Like, you have to buy the book. Buy a few of them if you can afford it. It's all good. If you can't, I get it, right? We're in the library, which is a good thing. But we need you to buy the book. It's important for those of us who work on this side. It's also important for the independent booksellers who work very hard, not just for us, but for our community. So you got to support as much as you can. This is a sort of a cyclical thing. This is a reciprocal relationship that we all have. So please buy the book. All right. That being said, thank you, my brother. Anything you need to say before we get into it?
No, it was great.
All right. So
Thank you.
So before we get into all my questions and all of that stuff, obviously we want to make sure we hear Hanif read some of this new work.
Yeah. Thank you. One, it's so good to be here with you. And there's a little bit of you that lives in this book. You know, there's the part of, I forget what, don't look at the school bus thing. I talked to you about this, how much I love the school bus trick. And there's a part of that in here where I kind of take the word gang and kind of manipulate it and switch it around. And so there's a real part of you who that lives in this book, and it's amazing to kind of think about how what Ross Gay would call non-citational fucking around, where we kind of just pull from our friends and our heroes and place them in the text, that we make. And so I have a lot of gratitude for you.
Thank you.
I love you. You know what I mean? You know how I feel about you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Y'all heard it.
I'm gonna read a bit about fire and heartbreak. A friend of mine, after LeBron James left Cleveland, there were jerseys burning everywhere in Ohio. Everywhere, people were throwing jerseys in the trash cans on fire. A friend of mine ran out of his house and went to go throw his jersey in the trash can that was burning, and then he pulled it back at the last minute. And I said, "What'd you do that for?" And he pulled it close to him. And he said, "Well, maybe he'll come back one day." And I remember thinking that was really sweet and tender, and also really clarifies this line between heartbreak and desire, where sometimes we build a world that someone who has left us might want to return to, even if we know they aren't going to. Or in another way, we hold on to the remnants of the physical remnants of the person who's left us, because we can perhaps care for those physical remnants more effectively than we could care for the person who once owned them. And so I'm going to read like 6-7 minutes of this thing about heartbreak and fire, and then I'm excited to talk to Jason. I'm going to begin in the middle of a sentence. Though I suppose fire is a type of song too. Some might say fire is a song that arrives after all the begging has exhausted itself, and after all those who reasonably asked and prayed and wept rise from their knees and make sense of newly idle hands. Don't know what good it is to burn a few cheap jerseys and a pair of sneakers, but fire sure enough gonna have its say one way or another. Just let anyone who has ever stood in front of a police precinct with fingertips reeking of gasoline wrapped around a bottle, a lighter itching in their pockets tell it. Just let anyone taping a bomb underneath a car tell it. Just let the niggas who want their hood back one way or another tell it, but definitely don't ever let the gentrifiers tell it. And look, I'm not placing a value or morality judgment on the shit. I suppose it depends on who and what is doing the burning and what brought the burning to life, but fire is a song, a whole symphony if you allow it to be. And I don't just mean it sounds, the way it disrupts the sky with a snapping of fingers, rhythmic if you catch it on the right notes. I suppose it depends on who and what is doing the burning there too, but I mean the hands, I mean its makers, I mean the things that drag people to its urgent heat to watch and spread its gleeful damage. There are those who might say fire carries a mercy with it, which I take to mean that it doesn't prolong the anguish. In the promised land, on the other side of this sometimes wretched scroll of miserable spinning days, I would guess that the decorum mayor will suggest we do not ask each other how we died or what dying felt like, the same way that those who have been locked up don't ask people how they got there, but the living have thoughts on burning. Scientists say it's the worst feeling imaginable at first, but then nothing. The flame renders the fire quickly chews through the nerves and senses, rendering the dying person without feeling, and the dying person, they say, is transported toward a type of ecstasy. Forgive my wandering into the fantasies of the no longer living once again, but I would want to hear from someone who crossed over. No telling how I'll go whenever I go, but I am skeptical of anyone living who suggests that any part of dying is less painful than it seems in the physical sense or otherwise, but I want to believe, knowing as I do that I absolutely one day will have both legs over the fence that divides living from from whatever comes after, and knowing as I do that leaping from the top of that fence might not be my choice. I would like to believe in this idea of ecstasy, or at least a moment where there is awareness of what consumes us, but no physical feeling to attach it to. I respect fire, like I respect any song that bends to the desire of the person who summons it. The flame is political, of course, but it is sometimes mundane, sometimes romantic, sometimes simply a necessity, and not all necessities are political, but some certainly are mundane, and a few damn sure are something close to romantic. And speaking of burning for a brief candescent moment before there is nothing left to be felt, this too is longing. This too is at least one stage of heartbreak, the earliest stage when any damage will do, and it is seductive to watch some shit go up in flames, even though the burning won't bring back anything any of us miss or love, but that ain't the point. I get why the jerseys burned in Cleveland. I get why the men gathered around and sacrificed their once beloved garments. How quickly can we get past the part where we feel everything and cross the other threshold, gasping and numb? In Oakland in 2009, black people were asked, how could you burn down your own neighborhood? And in Cincy in '01, black people stood in front of glass, bent into a scarred web like a wounded moon, and they were asked, why would you do this to your own? In Bloomington in 2000, white kids turned over cars when a basketball coach got fired, but no one really asked much. In Los Angeles in 1992, black folks stared into news cameras, their faces half illuminated by the glow from burning buildings disrupting the night, and someone with a microphone asked, why here, in this place? You live here. And in 1989 in Tampa, in 1980 in Miami, in any place where black people have been conductors to a symphony of fire, in any place where there were buildings once and then only ash, only the scent of hot wood or brick or paint, the question is always about how a people could do this to their own place, and there are many answers, and most of them are about how none of this shit is ours. You have mistaken being in a place for having control over it. A mistake I've made before, but certainly did not make with a brick in my hand and a bandana over my face. And it is harder to sell this on the evening news, but the fire is a baptism. The fire says, get gone and we can start clean. And so then what isn't your own can become your own if it is all some vast and empty, burned down nothing at the end of a long night. And I know this isn't generous to the shop owners and the elders who have lived on a block for decades and wanted to die on a block that was at least close to how they remembered it. But what can I do to convince you that fire is not the villain? And the person who lights a match isn't a villain. And the people cheering while a building burns aren't the villains. And there are villains, surely, but they aren't here, not among a people seeking deliverance. And the villain is an invention. The enemies, the ones I promised we'd leave behind, those are inventions, but they are inventions born out of a heart's breaking. I swear to you, I would never take to the streets looking to watch something burn if my heart were not broken. If, through its breaking, I did not need to invent an enemy nameless and faceless as a brick building or a glass window. Woven through almost every story of heartbreak there is a villain, even if the name isn't spoken out loud, or even if, through a retelling of the damage, a person smiles and reassures their audience that there are no hard feelings. Tell me you haven't invented a reason to transform the beloved into the wretched at least one time, to yourself, in the quiet of a dark room when the weight of loneliness demanded you find a target, at least for now, at the start of it all. I have been sad, and I have not wanted to look directly into the light of that sadness, and so I have distracted myself with the manufacturing of villainous moments from a person I loved and certainly still love. I may never speak these imagined moments out loud, but I cling to them. The time they accidentally broke a picture frame holding a photo of my mother as a living, smiling younger woman. I can, for this exercise, convince myself that this was a larger character flaw. They were always so clumsy after all, and inconsiderate, surely. They never really listened to me when I talked about things that interested me, right? Probably, I guess, that's bad enough. I can't believe I wasted my time with such a selfish person, and I'm mad at them now, not for leaving, but for being here in the first place. And forgive me, but I love the pure spectacle of a people newly in pain or newly feeling rejection, how hurt flows into rage, one body of water tumbling into another larger body of water. In the summer of 2010, amidst the burning of old fabric, I didn't know if I believed LeBron James to be a villain, but I relished watching the rationalizations of my pals, all of them, imaginations in overdrive, watching Game 5 of the Celtics series to attempt to determine exactly when LeBron quit on the team, when he decided he was leaving, even when there was a series still to be won. One pal of mine watched tape of the third quarter of Game 5 all through August, a quarter where LeBron went 2 for 7, and my pal would mumble, that was it. He was trying to lose, just wanted to get the fuck out of here sooner. This, I think, is a strange but necessary subplot of heartbreak, one that is easiest for me to access when I've been rejected, when I am back at the doorstep of a familiar pain. It isn't so much that if you see something enough, you begin to believe it. It's that the belief is already there, already planted and waiting to be ignited by seeing, and the seeing could be anything. One missed shot, or one forgotten returned phone call, or one kiss that didn't feel like the others. If I watched the Game 5 footage long enough, I could easily convince myself I was watching someone give up, not just on a game, but also a team, a city, a people, and then we have an enemy. And I cannot love an enemy, at least not out loud. Out loud, I curse my enemies. I only want them back in the silent hours. Oh, you're asking for a book. Sorry, I forgot that I'm borrowing Jason's book.
The book belongs to me. You know, thank you. You know, it's interesting. When I was preparing for this, I realized that I didn't want to be over prepared because we have done this before.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, I could do all of the super pseudo intelligent stuff, or I could read the book and ask a few lobs, some abstract questions, which is what I prefer with you especially. And kind of just see what happens. I just like talking to you, right? So for me, I'm like, you know how you see your people, you're like, I just want to talk to you, bro. I know we're supposed to be talking about this, and we will.
We just talk.
You know what I mean? But I just want to talk to you.
We talk as though there is no one here.
I just want to talk to you. But I do have a few questions because they did not come to hear us talk. So I do want to ask a few questions. And I always, last time I saw you, we were doing something in Baltimore for the performance joint.
Yeah.
And I asked you, like, what's an essay? You remember that question? I was like, what's it?
What
That
is
was my
an
first
essay? Yeah, I
question.
remember
What's an
that.
essay? So for this one, I think I want to start with, like, to you, right, which is all that really matters, right? To you, what exactly is ascension? Like, what does it mean?
Yeah. So last night I was trying to explain, not very well, that I think largely people begin to think of ascension as only ascending upward. But I also think ascension is about width and perhaps growing outward. I think it's just a directional movement that moves you away from whatever the position you held before it was, which is a central question of the book, which is, what does making it actually mean? You know, my barber got gentrified out of his old spot, right?
Sure.
As happens in the hellscape that we are in. And my barber decided to make a corner of his basement his new barbershop, right? And some would say that is a downward motion because he lost a brick and mortar shop and had to transform his home into a barbershop that sees less clients, but sees the clients he truly loves. And he goes to work without leaving his house. And his kids get to watch him do a thing he loves. And so he has made it, to me. He is on his own clock. He's on his own time. He is working out of his own home, doing what he loves alongside the people he loves. That, to me, is making it. Whereas some, I think, would consider making it having a brick and mortar in a neighborhood that you maybe don't love, and you have to leave your house to drive to, and everybody looks at you like you don't belong there until you actually do not belong there, right? And so acting in opposition to that is making it, I think. That is a form of ascension. I think it is just a question of direction. And so trying to upset the word ascension as something that only means upward trajectory, because so many of the ways that upward trajectory are defined are Western and I think violent and hostile towards those who don't fit a model of Western trajectories.
It's interesting, right? Because I would agree with it now. I agree now, right?
Yeah.
It's not what I would have thought, but it is something to consider, right? Because I think the stories, or all of the sort of work in this book, the essays, and your thoughts, to me, you always seem like a person interested in, like, less about elevation and more about expansion.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Even
for
in
sure.
the way that the essays are often constructed and architected. And I'm really trying hard not to ask the cliche question that every single person who interviews you asks, which is always about sort of like, oh, Hanif, how do you take this and this and this and put, right? Like, how do you, it's a thing that every single interviewer, and I know you've been dealing with it for a very long time, and it has become a bit of a calling card where it's like, I know that when I get a book with your name on it, so do these people who have read other works of yours. We know that we're about to go on some journey that feels, right, tangential, And then, like, you know, like a good musician, right? It always comes back to the one, right? It always, and then you have this moment, this seemingly epiphanic moment, and the whole time he knows what he's all like, you know, Geppetto in the thing, right? And so I think my question in all of that is, I'm not interested necessarily in like all of the dots that you connect, but I am interested on how you know where to start.
Oh, yeah. Well, um, there's some sly things around building a central planet for other planets to orbit around. For example, I know people haven't read the book, or most of you probably haven't read the book, but it begins with the line about enemies, right? This idea of the opening line of the book is, "You will surely forgive me if I begin this brief time we have together by talking about our enemies." But I needed actually just to get to my father. I needed to get, there's this image of my father who is bald-headed and eating and sweating while he eats. Because in order to get to that is the central image, because the whole central conceit of the pregame, the first part of the book, is about beginning with something and then slowly watching it diminish, be it hair, be it your ability to run fast, be it your love for a place. That is the central thesis of the book. But my father's bald head is actually what revolves around that. We're talking about absence, perhaps, not, or impermanence, not absence. But in order to do that, I had to say, okay, ooh.
I thought I didn't have to say the rules. I'm sure Derek, Ramunda, y'all probably should have said the rules.
I'm fine with it. Answer the question. Let's talk. Put on speakerphone.
Don't nobody want to hear your conversation. Like,
I do.
If he hears your conversation, you're going to become a plot point in the next essay.
I don't mind. Here's the thing. I don't want to get in a whole thing about phones. Never mind.
See? The thing he's been considering.
It is. Last year I wrote thousands and thousands of words on the appearance of phones and pop songs. I've been thinking about phones a long time. But in terms of this book, there's a whole thing of the idea of saying, let's discuss our enemies. And also a major conceit of this book was, because I knew that was going to be a first line. I dreamed up that first line in 2018. But what that does is, I don't want that kind of second person affect to go away. And so I think the maybe hardest thing of this book was writing through it using the second person with enough consistency to continue to say you, we, and our in a way that wasn't, I don't think, that wasn't overwhelming, but I needed to say, here are our enemies, and the way we know our enemies is because they disrupt our affections. Anyone who disrupts our ability to do close watching is an enemy. Speaking of close watching, when I was a boy, I watched my father eat. And so you maybe even forgot about the conceit of the enemy, because you're like, oh, now we're talking about his dad. But I needed to get to my father's head in order to tell the story of James Brown, the Fab Five, and
Michael Jordan.
Eventually LeBron James, right? Because it's easy and perhaps like funnier to be like, hey, LeBron James has a receding hairline, haha. But it's like, it's a lot harder to say, you're now thinking about impermanence. Like, we're not even talking about LeBron James's hair as anything important. We're talking about having something. And the fact that there's a countdown clock would suggest like the entire book is going to be about beginning somewhere and watching something slowly diminish, which is a massive heartbreak that we are required to endure if we love anyone, and even if we don't love anyone, if we are living a fucking life, you know what I mean? Like, that is the heartbreak that we are required to face all the time. And so to confront it repeatedly in the book in a way that wasn't harsh, I had to find a single planet I could orbit those around, and it began with my father.
It's funny because the first essay, the motif around the bald head.
I'm going to eat a date real quick, so
no, do your
talk.
thing, brother. Do your thing. I mean, answer phones, eat dates, do whatever you want.
Does anyone else need to
you
break their
what I mean?
fast other than me? Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Pass
It's
these
a family affair.
Yeah.
I do think, don't let your blood sugar drop. You know what I mean? It's important. Health is wealth. I do think that the motif around baldness was brilliant, and it's funny because I was thinking about all the other things that, you know, it's weird, right? We metaphorize everything, right? So like you talk about a bald head, and then the reader, me, right? I do everything that we read, we're like, you're a part of the thing, right? Like, we make the thing, we give it to you, you read the thing, and then in the reading of it, you're a part of the thing, and whatever you got going on, you project onto the thing, and then if the art is good, we get to sort of build new things that may exist or may not exist in the heart and mind of the person who made the original thing, right? So I'm reading the thing about the baldness, right? And I'm like, damn, a bald head got a whole lot of, there's just so much to pull from, right? Like the idea of recession, right, and the receding hairline, the impermanence of it all. The idea that once it is all gone, there is still a shine, right? The idea that everybody I know with a bald head, everybody I know who like was losing their hair, had the shape of a head meant for it to be bald.
I don't want to put him on the spot, but
I know.
My brother Clint, I love you, brother.
Yo.
Like Clint is like built for, you know what I mean? Like
Bro, you have never seen a man with a bald head by force, not a bald head by choice.
yeah.
Because those heads never really work out.
Tyrese?
But a bald head by force.
Now I'm just like thinking of bald black
That's
men
what
who
I'm
all look
saying.
yeah.
Like a man who has lost his head by nature always got the perfect shaped head for a bald head. Right? And I thought about that, right? Like this idea of like, I don't know, like, because I hate the idea. I don't like the idea that like, oh, everything kind of happens for a reason. But this idea that for whatever reason, things tend to be what they are because they are, like because they are, right? And I think like even thinking about you talking about the sweat on your father's head,
Yep.
and the amount of attention that it takes, right, to recognize that every time your father eats, there's a little bit of sweat that sort of beads up on his head that falls behind his ear, right? Like all of this stuff that you're noticing, you know, these are all the things that for me at least, while talking about losing something, we always tend to see them more acutely.
Yeah.
It all seems to be, to me, it all seems to come to life in a much more vivid way. I think it's a genius sort of thing to use, right? And then it gets to sort of Michael Jordan and the Fab Five. Can you talk a bit about the Fab? Everybody know who the Fab Five is?
Enough of you
We should
know.
probably just say, yeah.
Go home and watch it. They're five from Michigan.
From Michigan.
Yeah.
From Michigan. And the way you use them, I think, is also brilliant. Can you just talk a bit
Yeah.
about that? Because Chris Webber played here. I just want.
Yeah.
Everything will come back to
Chris Webber played. Two of them played here. Jawan Howard played here.
Jawan Howard played here for a long time.
Back, you know, I get why the team is no longer called the Washington Bullets. I fully understand, but
It's a better name though.
those jerseys, man.
Fire.
Those jerseys were fucking
Fire,
incredible.
yeah.
And I also get that the logo was problematic for like it was like a bullet coming out of it. I get it all.
At the time, the city was going through some complicated things at the time. You know,
The jerseys were incredible though.
the jerseys were incredible.
I
And it
wish-
was red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
Which made it even better.
Made
It was
it
like, America, this is really about you. You know what I mean?
The Fab Five were five freshmen who played at Michigan, and I was lucky enough to grow up in a neighborhood and household. I grew up in a very black neighborhood. I saw people show each other. I saw like men show each other affection. Usually in my house, in my friend's house, like my friends' dads would show them, But I had never seen like five strangers show each other love. If you like look at the photos or videos of Fab Five, they just can't keep their hands off each other. They're always hugging each other. They're always jumping on each other, and that was so beautiful to me back then. And this idea of the enemies, in particular, is because I remember being young and watching the Fab Five and being like, these dudes love each other, and they're so overjoyed to be on the floor with each other. And then hearing how like white people would talk about the Fab Five and being like, that's not what I'm seeing. Like I'm witnessing a completely different phenomenon than you. You know what I mean? And I go into the thing about gang signs in the book too, and the handshakes, where it's like the thing that people don't understand. And this isn't me co-signing the broad scope of gang violence necessarily, but like we grew up. I mean, I'm assuming like you grew up in neighborhoods of gangs too. And a function of gangs is not just about who. It's like I read in the book. It's about who has to stay the fuck out. It's not just about like who is in. It's like who stays out of this neighborhood because we have invented a language amongst ourselves that is ours, and that's affection. That's intimacy.
Protection.
It's protection. Mm-hmm. The handshakes that you make up with your friends. These are intimacy moments, and the Fab Five is a moment of intimacy. And to see how particularly white sportscasters talked about the Fab Five, I remember being like, these people must, not as a 9-year-old, I didn't think about this, but now I look back and I think these people must have been my enemy because they were casting doubt upon something that to me was just vibrant, extreme, fluorescent affection. And that is, that's a real thesis for the book too, in terms of, that whole first line, that whole conceit about anyone who disrupts what we understand as love is our enemy by default. That runs throughout the entire book, I think. And not explicitly, but I think it's some small nudges.
I agree. It's interesting. Speaking of handshakes, I was recently reading and doing some research and read something. I don't know if this is true, but I read something about how the dap was invented, I'd say popularized by black soldiers in Vietnam.
Yep, I heard that. I saw that.
You read that?
Yep.
Yeah, by black soldiers in Vietnam who, in the most frightening moments of their lives, right? We're talking about all these young black men who ostensibly have been sent off to die or fight and win and come back and then die a death every day, right? And they have their way of sort of camaraderie and of sort of and signaling to each other that like you and I are the same. This is their namaste, basically, right? Is this dap, right? The way I think about it now, when I see the kids do it or when I see LeBron do it, right, or all these people, is that like it also connects. It feels so connected to jazz for me,
Of course.
and,
Yeah,
it,
it's
and
a musical. It's a
very
musical gesture.
musical, and it feels the way that like we think about bebop, or the way that
Yep.
we think about sort of like let's complicate the music so it can't be copied.
I mean, this is when there's a whole history of this. When Pat Boone stole Tutti Frutti from Little Richard, right? What did Little Richard do? Little Richard was like, I'm gonna make Long Tong Sally because you don't have the ability. Like I've watched you take Tutti Frutti, and I know the limitations of your abilities linguistically. And so he came up with Long Tong Sally, where it's like a run-on sentence at a different pace. Pat Boone can't do that shit. He tried, didn't work. And so that too is acting. You adapt to your enemies, right? You adapt to, and the enemy is adaptable. I mean, a part of the argument of the book too is that to begin as an enemy is not to remain one. Our enemies and our beloveds are sometimes, that's like a fluid thing. The people we love become our enemies, at least temporarily. I mean, some of what I read early on is about this concept of creating a villain out of someone you love to at least create a distance between your affections and the realities of the limitations of your ability to be close to that person. So I'm fascinated by disrupting the binary of what an enemy is or what an enemy can be.
I want to take a step back just for a second to talk about form and format, because you're
Yeah.
like the best person to talk about form and format with. To me, and this is just my opinion, I think this is you at the height of your powers. In this moment, I'm sure you're beyond this now, but to me,
I'm not.
to me, this feels like, I mean, it's like everything. Like it's like all of the powers, from enjambment and the usage of like enjambment and prose, right? Punctuation. I got a particular thing I want to ask you about punctuation wise.
Yeah.
That I'll get to in a little bit. We could talk about, I mean, punctuation especially, because there's a lot of like, you run on. All kinds of things are happening in the book in terms of devices. And then there's like format, right? And you mentioned sort of how the book is structured with like, it's basically like a basketball game, right? There are 4 quarters. There are these brilliant timeouts. I have a question about this too. I'll get to it in a second.
I can't
There's
wait.
brilliant timeouts.
No one's
right?
asking about the timeouts yet. I'm so excited to talk about timeouts.
I'm ready to talk about timeouts. These brilliant timeouts. There's all this stuff, and you do get the feeling that like, oh, and there's a clock, right? There's a clock that's timing out. It's going down, right? As you're reading through all of his sort of these almost like vignettes, right? As he's sort of doing the Hanif thing, right? It's like you're going through the Hanif thing, and it's vignette after vignette, and the time is ticking down, which is a wild thing to experience because you don't know that you are tight. Your body has become tight as you're sort of exploring all this stuff. So I want to ask like about the conceit of this, about the choices you make here.
Right.
And just for you to wax a bit about this, you all are going to experience it when you read the book if you haven't read it. I'll try not to give it all away, but please.
Well, one thing is that I wanted to make a book that looked like nothing that existed. Like really, I came out of Little Devil in America feeling like every time I wanted to make a book that looked like nothing that existed, in a book that where I couldn't say, I think I could do that again. I came out I could write, if I wanted to, I could just write, They Can't Kill Us 2, 3, 4, 5 in Random House to be like, fine, I'll take it. And people would be like, I'll read this. And I came out of Little Devil in America being like, I could do that again. I looked at what was on the cutting room floor after Little Devil especially, and was like, I think I could do that again if I wanted to. I wanted to write a book that 1, left nothing on the floor, that 2, looked like nothing that existed, and that 3, I don't think I could make it again if I tried. And that seemed intimidating at first until I was like, I'm making something that doesn't exist, so it's impossible for me to fail. I'll know when I fail in the material sense. I'll look at the page and say something's not, but I also wouldn't have a clear blueprint for what failure. There's nothing that looks like this. And I do want to say this. I want to say 2 things. One is that I love Greg Tate, and I miss him a lot. And I've been getting very emotional thinking about Tate because this book does not exist without Tate. Insofar as he's someone I looked up to, who I was mentored by, and after we lost him, you know what I loved about Tate is that he wrote everything like it was his last thing. Every review, an email, he just put everything he had into every word he wrote. And I think it would be treasonous to him if this book that I had in my brain since 2017 or 18, whatever, if I said, I'll wait. I need to get, I had to take the big swing. I decided to after we lost them. 2, I think this is my most, I'm always just reaching for Morrison and failing. And I think when you reach for Morrison and fail, you succeed in many other ways. And I feel good saying, like, this feels like my most Morrisonian book, in part because there's some real material. I mean,
The tour joint, were you talking about?
that's
Hey,
that's just jazz. You know,
yeah,
like
I was
that's
like,
pretty
I
much.
read it and I was like, oh, look, he ripping it off. I'm just playing.
Yeah, no, I mean seriously, it kind of. I'm surprised my editors are like, you're kind of just ripping off jazz. There's a thing when I'm like walking through downtown Cleveland that is essentially the scene in jazz where it's like the person is standing on the street corner. It's like daylight slants through the. But also, I was reading a lot of Song of Solomon, the like flying African shit, and so like, there's a lot of Morrison in this book. But I also thought that there was an opportunity for me to take a really big swing and put everything I had. I'm someone who much like I'm of the Johnny Cash school. Johnny Cash said I'm going to write songs about three things: love, God, and murder. That's his oeuvre or whatever. Grief, place, and devotion are my three things. Oftentimes I get those, sometimes all three in the same piece, never all throughout the same book. And I really wanted to create a continuous book. And so I had to make some decisions around, just on a line level, how to get to that place and how to lead people to that place, because the syntax, I'm glad you talked about the enjambment thing, because that was really important to me. And
Did the editors?
they didn't get it.
I was
And
going to say.
they didn't get it at all. And it's not just enjambment, it's also doing some things around syntax that are, but the thing about prose editors, and I love my editors are great. Like the great Maya Millett, again, I can't, Maya Millett and Ben Greenberg are my editors, but Maya edited Little Devil, and we just have the same brain now. And even Maya was like, this thing where the sentence kind of stops and then starts at a different, and you can just tell prose editors, like, it's a poetry thing.
Yeah.
I'm doing like a poetry move. And Maya's like, all right, but I'm trying to get people to slow down on a line level because of what happens by inserting a clock. Inserting a clock causes you to tense up, your heart rate to raise. But if I'm writing I think of all the abilities that I have, I'm not very certain that I have a ton, but the one that I know that I have is like on a line level, I can really do some things. Like I can stretch out a sentence for a very long time so that you forget that you're reading one sentence. And I can, on the other end of that, make a staccato thing of a lot of small sentences that make you feel like you're reading one long sentence. And the part of that I really utilized in this book was I want to get people to slow down as they're reading, because their bodies are responding to the numbers, but I want their brains to respond to the language. And that was the hardest part of making this book.
Do you think, I'm always interested in, so someone like yourself who does this work all the time, when you started this book, did you have any of the moments where it's like, man, I wonder, is my ambition greater than my talent?
Yeah, I mean, always. My ambition is always greater than my talent. But the thing about this book is it started backwards. It used to be in inverse form, where it began with me walking through downtown Cleveland. It began in 2016 and ended with me in high school. And that was the hardest. That was hard. But it didn't work. Like, even when I turned it into my editors, I was like, I think this shit ain't working in this form. And, of course, they were like, yeah, to flip it around. But it was good to do the hard thing first, because it forced me to ask the question that I think is important. Do you want to show off, or do you want to write a good book? Those are two different things. You can show off in a good book, but the primary function of the book cannot be your showing off. And to have it like that, where I was like, I made this countdown clock, and I did this, and to talk about the scent, like the whole narrative is backwards. And my editor's like, well, all that other shit's cool, but the backwards narrative is just kind of like, you don't really need that.
It's
And
masturbatory.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I was trying to I found myself being like, my ambition is maybe outpacing my ability, and I'm just going to do the hardest thing possible. Like, I'm going to make the hardest book possible to feel better about myself. And my editors were like, just do, you don't have to do that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when you're like in the gym trying to lift like a big ass weight with no one spotting you. You know what I mean? It's like, just that guy's watching. Just have him come over.
It's like people who make fancy pizza.
Yeah.
It's like pizza actually is good.
I'm just eat it
as pizza.
I'm gonna eat it no matter what.
Cheese and bread is perfect.
It's pretty good.
You know what I mean?
So yeah, I mean, I had that moment, but I think my ambition is always outpacing my ability, and I think with the miracle of this is you get to be the architect of the bridge that takes you from ambition to ability, and sometimes the bridge is shorter than you think. Yeah. And I think I hit a point in this book, because the book was backwards, the thing where I like was riffing on your thing, the gang everywhere part, that used to be in the first quarter, and I remember it used to be at the end of the first quarter, and I remember I was really slogging and struggling through the first quarter in the beginning, and then I hit that part, And it was a very much like, I think I got my swagger back moment. I was like, I think I can do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that was I had envisioned that part of the book or that little paragraph. And to get it to work out on the page exactly as I'd envisioned it, I was like, I think I'm good.
You know, there's this old adage that I'm always reminding myself of that says there are great storytellers and there are great writers and they are rarely the same
Rarely the
person.
same, yeah.
They're rarely the same person. So good on you, man, for and shout out to your editors, which is,
Truly.
for those of you who don't know, the editors really be like the other collaborators who help us pull all the shit together. You know what I mean? I want to ask, because I don't want to run out of time.
We'll be fine.
But I do want to, but I do want to talk a bit.
Can I tell a really a short funny thing, a very short funny thing?
Of course.
Maya Millett is so wonderful and great. And on stage, I did a thing in New York with Wesley Morris, and we were talking about I have a large crush on Maya, the R&B singer, who is from this area. Yeah, from this area. You know, in case I don't think she's here tonight, but
I don't see her.
But I was like, I love Maya, and I was on. Wesley was like, oh, Maya, yeah, the R&B singer. I was like, yeah. Maya's great. You know what I mean? Like, I would throw my life away for Maya. And afterwards in the signing line, Maya Millett came up to me and was like, I'm so proud of you. Like, we did it. And I was like, oh, Maya, thank you so much. And these two people in the signing line were, oh, my God, is that Maya?
You're like, not exactly.
I was like, no, I'm not. This is not the woman I would throw my life. I mean, I would, actually, but for different reasons. Sorry, go ahead with your thing.
Shout out to all the Mayas of the world.
But especially that one. To all the Mayas, but particularly that one.
But especially that one. I think she's from like Lake Arbor or something like that, up exit 15.
I would go there.
Let's talk a little bit about, as we continue on with form and format, let's talk a bit about these timeouts, right?
Yeah.
This is, to me, like, there's a lot about this book that I love. These moments were the moments I was like, oh, he really in his bag. Like, these are the moments, because I know how much you love Ohio. And y'all, wait a minute, where y'all from? All right. All right.
Wow, look at us. Let's go.
All right. Oh, by the way, Michelle Indeguicello is also from Oxon Hill.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a lot of...
Yeah. He has a piece in there where he talks about... and Michelle Indeguicello is in this book as well. And y'all know who she is. Okay.
Surely.
Also from Oxon Hill, just so y'all know. She's Oxon Hill.
I wish she was here. I adore her.
Yeah, me too. But I was going to ask about these timeouts. So there are these moments in the book where he has these timeouts because this is a basketball game, as we've already established. And so there's these timeouts. And in these timeouts, I'll let you explain it. Please.
They're timeouts in praise of Ohio aviators, notable Ohio aviators, right? But the idea with the timeouts was that they began in a very literal sense of aviator and then move further and further away from the literal sense of aviator. So they begin with John Glenn and Lonnie Carmen. And I love John Glenn. And gosh, there was this massive thing about John Glenn in the book that got cut.
Die.
Yeah.
In space.
He wanted to die. I love John Glenn because the whole thing, there's another part of the book that did stay, that got pulled. You have to, at some point, decide what you are going to die for. If you are aware of the fact that you are going to die. And I love that John Glenn very firmly was like, I am willing to die to see outer space again. Like, not at all concerned with my life if I get to see outer space one more time. And that kind of devotion, I adore John Glenn. I really do. Like, I don't have a lot of heroes in the sense, and I don't have a lot of like Ohio heroes other than Morrison. But yeah, so I wanted to get away from, I wanted to do these little poems that move further and further away from strict definitions of aviation. So we do first quarter, it's like Glenn and Carmen, and then by the end, it's like Kid Cudi, right? Man on the Moon, right? It's of course Morrison, or a better example is Virginia Hamilton, who has a book that people could fly.
Shout out to
Flying
Africans.
Yes, right, Flying Africans, right? So it's like it was kind of making the idea of aviation abstract, and of course the last two in the book are LeBron James and myself, which that was the hardest to write, obviously, because
my favorite one now.
The one that's me.
Both of those together as a
pair.
Pair.
And it was initially just LeBron James, and then I had a friend read through, and they were like, well, "Why don't you write one for yourself?" And I thought, no, that would be really hard, even though it's only like 5 lines,
That's great.
But the idea is we're transforming the idea of what aviation is and who gets to be in charge of it. Like, you cannot tell me that Virginia Hamilton is not an architect of flight. You cannot tell me that Toni Morrison is not an architect of flight. These kind of folks who, and I wrote like 40 of those. The ones that are in the book, I think there's 10 in the book.
Where's Tracy Chapman?
She was one of the ones I wrote.
I was going to
She just didn't fit. There was no, because I tried to also make them somewhat related to the central theme of the quarter they're in. Chapman didn't fit, but I mean, I wrote like 3 for her. I adore. I mean, Tracy Chapman is my second favorite Ohio writer. It's like Morrison, Chapman, and then all the rest.
Langston Hughes so much?
I don't hate
You
him.
never talk
I
about
don't
him.
know.
And
Yeah, I
he's
don't
an
talk about
Ohioan.
Hughes. He's a Cleveland guy. Yeah.
We won't have to talk about it now, but I am curious about this.
Yeah.
I just noticed over the years, over the years, I'm like, why doesn't he ever talk about this?
You know how sometimes like somebody's like a legend, but you maybe just don't love you respect the legend, but you don't love like in music, this is a lot easier where it's like, fucking. Now I'm afraid to say anyone. But like I this is probably getting me into trouble. Like I adore what Diana Ross has done for the broader world of black music specifically. A lot of those albums aren't for me. I would say all of those albums aren't for me.
Got you.
So I think Hughes is maybe the Diana Ross for me of Ohio writers.
I'll take it. We can move on.
But yeah, I mean, like he's still Diana Ross.
Yeah, we can move on. Like, I want to ask 2 quick questions, and then we'll take it to the audience. Number 1 is, why you don't have no halftime?
So, I had to sacrifice halftime for the intermissions. 'Cause it was one or the other. Okay. It was like everything with this book had to be on a like, how much am I trying to fit between the pages? Halftime would have been overkill. The intermissions with halftime would have been overkill. Just the intermissions make it flow a bit better, and I had more to say in the intermission essays than I would have in one halftime. Like I wanted to work in the He Got Game thing because it brings back my father. I wanted to work in the hustle thing because that like quarters about hustles. I desperately wanted to work in the above the rim shit because I got to do that cool backwards erasure thing. That I will say, I know I just said like you can't show off. The above the rim thing was just showing off. I was like, I figured out how to do like a backwards erasure, and my editors were like, I don't think this makes sense. And I was like, it's going in.
It's cool. In my mind, I was hoping there was a halftime. I'm like reading. I'm like, oh, maybe we're gonna get to the halftime, and in my mind, it's gonna be like some oleo. Like you were gonna do like an oleo.
An oleo, but
where it was gonna be like a real basketball halftime, which, by the way, is a circus.
Real circus,
right? And so I was like, oh, we can have t-shirt toss. We can This is about to be
Shout out,
nonsense mascots and like. And I was
Red
like, I wonder
Panda.
how's he gonna pull this off, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, and then it didn't happen, and I was like, I gotta ask him about this. My last question is a question I've asked you before, but it's a question I'll ask you every time we do this because I think the answer changes with everybody. And this is a book about a lot of things. I mean, I didn't even get to when you got locked up and like all of that stuff, the ideas around heartbreak and loss, all the things that you sort of weave. And I have lots of questions about how you excavate this much of your life, constantly digging through, mining your own life. But like, what would you, if you could look back? Remember I asked you this? If you could look back to your 10-year-old self. Maybe we bump it up a little bit this time. Let's look at like Hanif at 16.
Yeah.
What would you thank 16-year-old Hanif for?
Well, I think maturing past the point where he thought grief was something that you got to be done with. I think it took me 3 years after my mom died to learn that grief isn't something that you get to be. There's no achievement you can unlock that stops grief from living within you for the rest of your life and transforming within you the rest of your life. And I didn't learn that until I was 16, until I maybe lost more people, because I think that was a point where I decided to want to even have the desire to move beyond grief is treasonous to the life that you are grieving, I think. In the life that you get to live alongside that person for years and years and years and years. If I were to surrender myself to those impulses I felt after my mother died, then I would lose parts of my mother that I would not be able to get back at an accelerated rate, And I think my teenage self asked me to hold firm to the realities that the people I love are only lost in this material world, and there's another world where they exist very robustly.
Ladies and gentlemen, the great Hanif Abdurraqib. All right.
So we're going to do Q&A now. I'm going to ask everyone who has a question to line up on this wall here. I will hold the mic while you ask your question, and then we're going to let Hanif and Jason answer. So if you have questions, please line up over here on my left, please. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, hi, Juan.
Hey,
This question might be really boring, but Jason already talked about like how you do the Hanif thing with the complexity and you jump in and out of stuff and ideas. My question is like, what does pre-writing look like for you, and like how do you track that, and like with all those ideas, like are there any like tools or methods you use or whatever you use to like build
oh
that
yeah.
clarity and find clarity in the end with all of that?
That's not a boring question. That's a great question. Research is clarifying. My pre-writing happens so much in my head that it can begin to feel not grounded in anything. I do so much of my writing in my head before I sit down to put words on the page because I don't trust. It's a lack of trust thing. Like I don't trust my. I think as someone who's like really committed to my obsessions, has a lot of obsessions, it's easy to talk yourself into the things I love are foolish, right? Because I think there's so many things in the world that tells us that what we love is foolish, right? Or that tells us the pursuit of what we love is foolish. So I do so much pre-writing in my head, which means that I do a lot of research to ground myself in my obsessions. And that act of research, a perfect example of this is that like I watched, there's a thing in the book with a shot from 1976, a Dick Snyder shot in the playoffs, where I kind of run it back a bunch of times to try to get people to envision a basketball against a blue sideline looking like a sunset. I watched that shot 75 times, right? Because it made you become then evangelical in nature. I said this with Little Devil with the Soul Train shit. I've watched it so many times that I'm just delivering the good news of what I've witnessed. That is what clarifies the writing, right? You don't have to. My friend Sarah Kay has this poem about starlings, the birds that take the shape of a bird and it comes from this idea of her saying the poem has already written itself. That's the clarifying point. If you bear witness to something you love enough, then your job is not to try to reformat that or articulate it in a way that is better than what exists. Your job, I think, or my job, is to become evangelical in the spirit of what I have witnessed with gratitude, and that is what research is for me, effectively, and that is what clarifies my writing. Hey.
Hey, thanks for coming out tonight. This is such an incredible endeavor. In all of these meditations, I find your voice is always so hopeful and joyful, which shows like such an act of care and self-preservation.
That's so
I think
kind.
that in meditating about grief and loss and the lot of time that you have to write so much on these topics, what does your self-care look like in like when you're constantly thinking about obviously and witnessing Black Death and other types of oppression?
Yeah, I mean, I, I sometimes I'm not that invested. I mean, I guess I'm invested in self care as like a survival tactic, but not in a way that frees me from. My reality feels harsh regardless of what I do, right? I think the way that I am wired is to not turn away from the world, and I think the way the world is wired is to not allow me to turn away from it. And so I'm not really committed to. And I know that this is not what you're asking, but I'm saying like I'm not actually committed to self-care as something that even puts a soft film or a filter over the realities of the world. I am committed to self-care in terms of how can I, as someone who believes the world that we have is untenable and would like to build something that is better than this world, how can I survive to get from devastation and grief to the next movement? And so yeah, I go on my little runs. I'm a runner. I go on my silly little runs. Too many miles, certainly. You know what has grounded me on tour so far, and this is a ritual that I have, is after this, it will be like a lonely stretch where I go back to like the hotel alone, and I sit in bed with M&Ms, and I call some of my West Coast friends, and I ask them to tell me about their days, or like I ask them to put their kids on the phone, so I can hear from the kids I love, who are just like, by virtue of loving them, I love their children, and these are things that whatever just gets me to the next fight, I think. Be it if the next fight is me having to read and, to tackle whatever anxiety disorders are doing that day and read in Miami tomorrow, that's the next fight. If the next fight is me having to have a brutal, but lovingly brutal organizing meeting to figure out, like, how the group I organize with is going to get Eid letters into prisons in enough time, that's the next fight. So self-care to me is a ritual of propulsion, in whatever it takes, because the world demands more of me, of all of us, I believe. I'm not special. I'm saying the world demands more of all of us. But left to my own devices, I wouldn't be up to the fight. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm such a big fan. You've made me cry on so many occasions. But you've talked a lot about how this book is the book that you think you can never write again.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if out of all of your work, your current body of work, do you have a specific piece that you want to be remembered by?
No. I mean, well, not to mean dismissive. I just think that's not my. I'm not too concerned with legacy or anything. Legacy should not be the concern of the living, I think. And the way I think about life, I mean, I'll be dead, so it won't be any of my business. But I will say this. I mean, I do hope that what I have put into each project, I hope there's an arc of growth. I really do. I feel like I took a leap from, say, Crown Ain't Worth Much to Fortune for Your Disaster, and that leap existed because of the amount of labor it took to make Fortune for Your Disaster emotionally and just materially. And I think if you look at my arc of nonfiction work, I know I understand the legacy of They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us. I really do. And I'm glad that it has had that. But I also think that if I look at They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us and look at There's Always This Year, for me, as the person who made them, it feels like it feels like paint by numbers to Picasso type shit, you know what I mean? And it should feel that way. Like, it should feel that way. And so I don't know if I have an answer to what work of mine I want to be remembered most for. I hope that people find what they need in all of them, or some of them. Like, I hope that people can find something that answers some questions for them. But for me, I just want to be remembered as I guess, if I think about it at all, I want to be remembered as someone who just tried, who like continually. I want to be remembered as someone who's dissatisfied with what I knew I could do and tried to reach for something that felt impossible until I found it.
So the first time I was ever in a room with you was in Phoenix, Arizona, at like a 2015 International World Poetry Slam.
Oh, yeah.
Every time I've ever heard you speak, you've spoken to a story that is so specific yet so relatable. And I'm wondering, like, do you think that there's a limit to how specific you can be as a writer in your own life, yet still speak to so many people so intimately?
Thank you for that question. No, I don't. I believe there are no limitations to specificity. And I think actually the deeper we go into specificity, I love Mary Oliver. I love Mary Oliver so much. And speaking of Ohio writers, I mean, I adore Mary Oliver. And yeah, she's one of ours. Yeah. But you know, what I love about Mary Oliver, I think Mary Oliver is deeply misread, right? Like, I think there's the Etsyfication of Wild Geese and all that type shit. But what people seem to miss, and I think people actually, speaking of Ohio writers, people miss this about Ross too. People miss this about Ross Gay. They're not just, this isn't like waxing poetic on the high specifics of nature for the sake of it. They are saying you are going to die. Actually going to die, for sure. Mary Oliver's entire arc of work. I sometimes read Mary Oliver's work and I'm like, how did what happened to her legacy, this is why I don't think about legacy. I'm like, how did what happened to her legacy happen to it when this is what the work is saying? Like, I can see it. She is saying, you are for sure, you are required to die, but you are not dead yet. Therefore, have you considered this duck? You know what I mean? And you will realize that you actually have not. Like, the thing with Mary Oliver is like, look at that stream. And you are looking at the stream, and you're realizing you've never seen a stream before. Or you've seen water, but not like this. There is no limit to what we can do as writers when it comes to specificity, because you can make people see anything they want to see. That, speaking of, I know I keep talking about how everyone else is in this book but me. That Dick Snyder shit in that book where I'm kind of, there's a part in the book, I know a few of you have read it, where I'm just trying to literally make people see a basketball against a blue background look like a sunset. And it requires me repeating the scene over and over again, saying, like, I'm going to start again. It looks like this. No, we're going to start again. It looks like this. That's a Mary Oliver trick. It's Mary Oliver turning your head slightly and saying, you're looking here, and she was always saying, no, it's there. That requires a level of trust that is only built through saying, I can be highly specific because I know something about the world that not only you don't know yet, but that you desperately want to know. Even if you don't know, you want to know it.
Appreciate you both for being here so much. My question kind of more revolves around something a little bit lighter, but also in the sense that, and if you have such like a prolific Instagram presence for the culture in many various avenues, I mean, your protest policies in helping Columbus, your staunch and heavy and deep sentiment with Palestine and being pro-Palestinian and all these different things, your consistent Spotify playlists, like you're really intertwined into like tapped in, and it's, I mean, for me it's great. I get hella music from that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
my question is a little bit lighter in the sense that, was there, musically speaking, anything sonically that was driving you while you were writing this? Was there?
Oh yeah, there's a whole thing on begging songs in there. Like men, I made these two twin playlists when I was making this that are still, they're not public because I'm still adding to them, and I don't believe in. I'm a purist. I don't believe in altering playlists once they get made public, because to make a playlist, if we are to believe the playlist making is in the lineage of mixtape and CD, mixed CD making, you can't alter a mixtape when it's, like when you give it to someone, it is theirs, and they can alter it maybe, but you cannot. So I believe in that with playlist. So I've made it public, but one is called "The Fellas Are Pleading," and the other was all like men doing the like "Baby Please Come Back" songs, and the other one is called "The Fellas Are Cheating," which is like, like Deborah Cox, it's over now, and like, like women being like, please do not come, actually do not come back. Those were kind of two really heavy things for me, in largely because so much of it, I think this is my most romantic book, and I think it is romantic because so much of it is revolving around devotion and desire, and I think that comes to the forefront of these like often comically bad thematically, but also sonically very good begging songs, where it's like, men are hyper theatrical, oh baby, please, 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 and women are like, oftentimes, I know that these kind of binaries fail us outside of the confines of this particular thing, but it is very often heteronormative, very gendered, like, men, please, please, please come back, and women being like, I can take or leave, There's not a lot of begging songs by women. There's just not in the history of music. And I find that fascinating and very funny. And so those were things that were driving me. I was listening to a lot of Bone Thugs and Harmony, like a lot of Northeastern Ohio rap, Chip and Cuddy, Old Cuddy, because there's a cadence to that kind of corridor of rap up in the, Bone, I know that they're known for the melodic rapping fast, but like, how do you think Cuddy got his ear for melody? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm so amazed when people are like, "Kid Cudi," and I love Cudi deeply. I've written on him multiple times, and all this type of shit. But it's so odd to me when people are like, "Kid Cudi revolutionized like melody," and it's like, no, he was a kid listening to Bone Thugs and Harmony. That is why he sounds like that, and it bothers me honestly that there's this massive erasure of, broadly of Ohio music. You know what I mean? And I love a lot of Ohio bands that are not. Someone recently was like, I forgot who they were talking about, the National or the Breeders, and I love both those bands, but they were like, that's just like one of the greatest they're the greatest Ohio bands. And I was like, well, this is Ohio players, and also here's a scroll of funk bands from, and I love the Breeders, but also like, Slave, Ohio players, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I was listening to a lot of Ohio shit and trying to ground myself in the kind of sounds, like treat it as a sonic palette and not just a one-off thing, like this band sounded like that, but they sound like that for a reason, yeah. Hey.
Thank you behind me for not making me the last question. I really appreciate that. But I was going to ask you, because I write myself, I'm a bit, I feel like I struggle with like one line. So what do you do when you have a really good line, but you can't like form anything around it, or like struggle to?
Yeah, I'm a big line saver. And by that I mean like I just don't throw anything away. I put everything in a folder because sometimes the line, like I said early, like the first line of this book was I dreamed that up in 2018. You know what I mean? And I didn't have anything to build around it in 2018 at all. But I could wait, and then something would emerge. So I'm a big line saver. I'm a big like put the line in a folder, and then the more you write, the more you learn how to write around the things that exist in your head already. I really believe that. There were parts of this book that I couldn't have written without writing some of the sentences of Little Devil in America. I have folders of like discarded lines or unused lines that I go through every time I sit down to write and say, okay, am I ready to build a world around this yet? Am I ready to build a world around this yet? So I'm a big line saver, and I think about the slow process of learning how to write my way around the things I'm committed to, because I'm committed to beautiful language, and I don't want to discard it ever. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. That was the last question. We definitely appreciate you
damn,
guys
my bad.
so much.
I feel bad.
I'm
So
sorry.
thank y'all for coming out on opening day too. How are we feeling about our nationals and our O's?
Nats.
Let's go Nats.
Let's go Nats.
Y'all,
This is
I was in Philly last night, and I was like, "How do you feel about our Phillies?" Everyone was like it's over.
Exactly.
Everyone here was like,
You know what it is? We're just fatigued with losing. And so,
Well.
like, if you ask about the Caps, we get a little more excited.
Yeah.
But like, we're just tired of losing. That's all.
Well, tell it to Cleveland fans.
But we still have one of the greatest. We still have one of the biggest attendances to every sport.
Oh,
so
that's
like,
beautiful.
nobody's gonna cheer. But
People still going to Wizards games?
Going.
People are still going to Wizards games?
Yes. Bro, I be in them games. Yes.
I mean, I know you go.
We all go. We in there.